This is Gretchen Men for acoustic guitar. Today we're going to be talking about the dreaded music theory. And I can't emphasize how much there is unnecessary intimidation around this subject and how much will open up to you on the guitar and creatively by just understanding some of the basic fundamentals of it. Okay, so a common problem is that a lot of people, a lot of guitarists will understand a few basic chord shapes, a few scales, but they don't really understand how to construct them themselves or how to find them elsewhere on the neck. So step one, and this is so important, learn your notes on the fretboard. The thing that a lot of people feel like is that music theory is some esoteric knowledge that was set up to confuse them, but I promise it not only makes mathematical and geometric sense, it makes alphabetical sense. So learn your notes throughout the neck, on every single string, every single fret. It's really not that difficult. It's an investment of a little bit of time and a little bit of understanding what notes are in the Western scale. So there's a couple things you need to know, and I'm going to go over these quickly. There's a ton of online resources. I recommend getting a textbook if this is all new to you or working with a teacher. But the very quick version is that we have the notes in the Western scale moving from A to G with a number of notes in between. So we'll talk about accidentals, which are sharps and flats. A sharp raises a note a half step, a flat lowers it a half step. And within all of the notes, we have half steps that occur between B and C and E and F. That'll make more sense in one moment when we go to the fretboard. So the way that I recommend even approaching your fretboard and really getting familiar with it is write out all of the notes in order and be able to reference them if you're confused at all. We're going to start with just the low E string. I like to start with the low E string because you get 2 for 1. The low E and the high E. Once you know one, you know the other. So the way I start off with, when I was learning it myself and with my students, is I just start off using small sections of the neck and then gradually working my way up. So for example, I know there's a half step between E and F, so we have E, F, and one fret to the adjacent next fret is a half step. So everywhere on this is half step, half step, half step, half step. This is a whole step, this is a whole step, this is a whole step. So we start with, okay, E to F. That's E, that's F. Now a half step up from F is F sharp, which also could be known as G flat. That's called an enharmonic equivalent. It sounds intimidating, but all it is just another way of saying the same note. So if this is F sharp or G flat, this is G, meaning this note's a half step down from G or a half step up from F. So then you drill yourself on that. You think, okay, E, F. You think F sharp G. You think G flat E. And so forth. And just drill yourself on 4 notes. And then start moving your way up the neck. Once you get to the 12th fret, that's your octave, meaning that that's your E. And everything above there repeats. I do still recommend at least exploring any notes you might be able to reach on your fretboard, because once things start getting smaller up above the 12th fret, it does start to look different. So work your way through all of the notes. And a good also way to remember them is at least once you've memorized them logically, meaning that you can find them by counting up, it's very helpful to do things like, okay, the dot, the 3rd fret. Okay, I just know that's G. I don't have to count up. You just know that's G. Okay, this other dot, the 5th fret, that's A. I just know it's A. And a good way to remember that is if you tune using that, you know that the 5th fret is always going to be the same as the note above it, except for in the case between the B of the G string and the open B. So I recommend doing this yourself, drilling yourself, or better yet, if you have like a buddy who's working on that as well, quiz each other. It shouldn't take more than, a week of devoting a little bit of time to it before you will feel totally confident finding any note on the neck. So a brief moment on scales, and there's a lot more that can be said about this, so we'll just touch on it quickly and then move on to the examples. A scale, at least the way I think of it, is simply a pattern of half and whole steps. We've already talked about half steps within the context of learning notes on the neck. And a scale has a pattern of half steps and whole steps, starting from any note you want, and that pattern is what gives a scale a characteristic sound. So for example, a major scale is defined by the sound of half steps existing between the 3rd and 4th and 7th and 8th scale degree. So that can be anywhere on the neck, starting on any note. So for example, this would be a G major scale. With your half steps happening between your 3rd degree and your 4th degree and your 7th and 8th. Again. A minor scale, for example, has half steps between the 2nd and 3rd scale degree and between the 6th and 7th scale degree. And so that sounds very different from a major scale, like this. Now, from any scale, we have associated harmonies. And what that is you take 3 notes, which is called a triad, aptly named. And the way you would construct any triad within any key is first determine what key you're in. So let's take the key of G major. That's what we're going to be working with for most of these examples. And let's start with the first note, G, which is called the tonic. And it's the note from which everything is built. And if we skip the 2nd scale degree, we get the 3rd. So this is root, 2nd, 3rd. So we have root is G, the 3rd is B, and then we have the 5th. So we're going to skip the 4th, and we're going to go to the 5th, which is D. That creates a G major triad. Obviously, you're not going to play it like this because you have 2 notes on the same string, but if you refinger it for G, B, you have, and there's your G major chord. You can do that starting on any note, but keeping it in the same key. So for example, in the key of G, if we want to do a chord built on the 2nd scale degree, okay, you have A, which is your 2nd. You skip your 3rd scale degree, which is the B, to get the 3rd of A, which is C, and then you skip the 5th to get the 5th of the scale to get the 6th scale degree, which is E, meaning the 5th of the A chord. And that would sound like, so the 2nd chord of a major scale is always going to be minor, and I'm sure you can hear that. There's minor. If it were a major chord, it would sound like, but in the key of G, the chord built on the 2nd scale degree is an A minor. So now I want to take you through an exercise that I found incredibly helpful to me, not only just for understanding the notes on the neck, but also for really seeing how chords are built. One of the things that I feel like can be very constraining to guitar players is they're taught or they learn a few different chord shapes, and then they don't have any idea how to build those shapes themselves. There are more ways than I could even estimate on how you could construct chords. There are shapes, admittedly, that are much more commonly used for a whole variety of reasons. A lot of times they fall nicely under the fingers, and sometimes it's because they sound really good. But in general, you should be able to see and understand and be able to construct your own chords. So the exercise that I did quite a bit is I started connecting chords up and down the neck. For the purpose of this exercise, I like to think top note down. You can think bottom note up, which is actually the very common way to view chords. But the reason I wanted to think about top note down is because the vast majority of the time I'm playing with a bass player, meaning whatever the bass is playing is actually determining the chord inversion. They're playing the lowest note. And because I like the idea of being able to create chord melodies, and so knowing what that top note is can be very helpful. But with anything, learn it this way, but then also be able to change your perspective and understand, like, okay, that has the root on top, but it also has the root on the bottom. So we'll go through these exercises step by step so you can understand. So example 1 is a G major chord with the root on top. For now, I'm only going to be playing the top 4 notes. You could do this on any group of strings as you see fit, but we're going to start here. So what we have is we have our root of G, our 3rd of B, our 5th of D, and then our root again. So here's one way to play a G major chord with the root on top. And that probably looks familiar if you're familiar with that bar chord. we're just taking off 2 of the lower notes. Okay, so now what I'm doing is, if I look at this, I look at my 3rd finger because I think, okay, well, can I reach up to that B? Not very comfortably. I'd never really probably play that. So that means I need to shift position. So if I take my root here that's that my 3rd finger's playing and I replace my 1st finger here, I see that I can actually do like a G major or a G power chord here. We got the root, 5th, and root. So really I just need my 3rd, which is my B. So I'm actually going to refinger it. Now we have a G major chord with the 3rd on top. Continuing that pattern, anytime I see fingers stacked like that, I think, okay, that just screams bar. So we'll move from here. And now actually what we're going to be doing is we're going to be moving our root up to the 3rd. Everything else is going to stay the same. So if you can envision that. Now we also still have the 3rd on top, but we have the 3rd in the bass too. Now we want the 5th on top. Okay, well, there's only a minor 3rd between the B and the D, between the 3rd and the 5th. So we just put our pinky down. And now we have G major chord with the 5th on top. Okay, now there's no more fingers left for me to move up, so I've got to switch positions. So I'm going to take my 1st finger, put it where my pinky is, and now here I go. Now we have a G major chord with the 5th on top. Fingers are all stacked like that, means probably there's going to be a bar, and now we have G major chord with the root on top. We could also then go back to the one where we started here. So to follow the examples, we have example 1, example 2, example 3, example 4, example 5, example 6. In example 7, it's going to start just like the first 6 examples, but then what we're going to start doing is working our way up and down the neck, going through different keys. Without getting deep into harmonic theory, there's something that people will often refer to as the circle of fifths. And what it relates to is very closely related keys, meaning keys that share all but one note in common. So what we're going to do is we're going to move specifically around the circle of fifths. The way I think about it and the way we're moving is if we're moving from one key and then we're interpreting that key not as the root but then as the dominant of the key that follows it. Meaning you can see this as a G major in its own key, or you can see this as the dominant of C major, meaning it's a chord of tension versus the chord of release, or it can be the chord of release if this is your chord of tension. So in example 7, we're going to move from G major, ascending, and then go to C major to descend, and then to F major to ascend again. This is example 7. And you can continue this throughout all of the keys. Just interpret the key that you're currently in as the dominant of the key that follows. So in example 8, we're going to explore why learning a little bit of theory really pays off. And this is with the slight amount of knowledge that the third of the chord is what determines its quality. The quality meaning major or minor. So a major chord and a minor chord share two of the same notes, with the third and the minor chord just being a half step lower. So what I mean by that is if you take a G major chord, as long as you know where your notes on the neck are, you know that your third right here is B. That's the only B in this particular inversion of the chord, or in this particular voicing of the chord. So if you want to move it down a half step, all you have to do is lift it, your middle finger and bar here. You have G minor. So there's G major, G minor. So example 8. We start off with our familiar G major chord. We locate the third, which is the B, being played by our second finger right here. We move it down a half step to B flat. There's G minor. Now we continue. We have G major. Our third's on top. We're going to move it down a half step. There's our G minor. Continue upward. Here's G major. Because we have 2/3 in this one, both in the lowest position and on the top, we're going to have to move them both down. So we refinger it a little bit more. And now with the fifth on top, major, we're going to have to move it down to, there's our minor version, major, there's our third, and then we have our major. I tend to, rather than, you could do this voicing, but I don't really think that's very practical to play, at least not for me. So what I do instead is I just change the voicing slightly on it, but it's still all the same note. So there's your equivalent G minor chord. So once you've learned and studied and understand these voicings, instead of just making it a rote exercise, try writing with it. Try taking a chord progression you already know and playing it in a totally different area of the neck. So rather than just sliding a chord around, like say moving from F to A, try playing it all in the same position. Try playing it somewhere you've never even thought to play. Or better yet, create a chord progression of your own, all in the same position. The reason that this exercise can be so beneficial, well, there are numerous reasons. One is that it helps you really understand and see your fretboard in a way that's applicable to playing chords, which is what we all do as guitar players. Two, it helps you build and construct your own chords. So for example, you may have a chart put in front of you with a chord that you have no idea what it sounds like. You've never played it before, but maybe you can figure it out. Say somebody's asking you to play a G major with a flat 5, and you're going, I've never done that before. Well, you can take your familiar chord form and you can go, okay, where's my 5? Okay, if my 5 is here, how would I finger that? Okay, I guess that's what it is. And I'm not saying these are necessarily going to give you the most applicable voicings, but the point is you'll understand it and you'll be able to come up with voicings of your own. You'll be able to move notes around in a way that falls naturally under your fingers. And furthermore, if you ever wanted to do something like a chord melody, this is exactly what it's made of. So as with anything, I recommend write with it, incorporate the new tools into your vocabulary so that they can be put to a musical purpose.